Now, of course, functional theory takes a different perspective. Kingsley Davis and Wilbert Moore, both functionalists, stated that in their opinion, stratification in society is not only inevitable, there's no way to avoid it, but that it's necessary. They felt stratification was unavoidable because in a society, some jobs are more important than others, and people have to make sacrifices to train for these really important jobs. And because of this, inequality actually motivates people to undergo these sacrifices. This might be a lot to take in, so let me give you an example. Think of somebody who might choose to become a physician. Arguably, a doctor contributes more to society. It is a more important job in society than, say, a sociologist. So the question then, according to functionalists, is how do we as a society make sure that there will be people willing to make the sacrifices necessary to become a doctor? Putting a lot of time and effort into studying hard at school, likely moving away from home to attend university for years and years, kind of putting their adult life on hold in some ways to obtain a university degree and then go to medical school, where they will be required to go into great debt to obtain their credentials. And while studying in medical school, not only going into debt because of it, but not making much to live on while you do it. So a functionalist would look at this and say that we as a society need to provide some kind of motivation to make these sacrifices, to do what needs to be done so that we have a supply of qualified people to fill these jobs deemed more important in society. So we need to provide the money or prestige or respect or a combination of these, a higher level of reward for these people. And because of this need, stratification is inevitable, as some will not be willing to do all of this to make these sacrifices. Because of that, as an adult, they will end up living in a lower socioeconomic status. So if inequality or stratification didn't exist, what motivation would people have to do this? Some occupations need to have more of a reward to encourage people to do what they need to do to be qualified for that occupation. So in other words, functional theory views stratification as functionally necessary. Now, I want to play devil's advocate here, just as the textbook does, regarding who we as a society should consider more important overall for society. For example, a farmer or a doctor. And if you read that passage in the textbook, it's a really good point. A simple point, but very effective. I sometimes joke with students that in the case of a zombie apocalypse, I don't think sociologists would be the first people you think of as necessary for the continued survival of society. And I think what the focus needs to be on here is the word necessary. I mean in terms of being absolutely necessary. Is it absolutely necessary to have a source of food? Can we survive without that? No, we can't. Society would collapse and we'd all starve to death. So in this sense, a farmer should be considered more necessary, more important than a doctor. Yet doctors usually make much more than farmers. Several years ago, sanitation workers in Toronto went on strike, and they were smart enough to do this in the summer months. Why was this so smart? Because this meant that in the summer heat, having piles of garbage sitting on sidewalks, rotting and smelling in the sun, was much more effective than having bags of garbage freezing in cold weather without much smell at all. So when you think of the functionalist perspective of why stratification and inequality exist, keep in mind that their perspective in terms of what it means for an occupation to be considered functionally necessary can be debated. So we have conflict theory and we have functionalism. And I want to talk a bit about Weber. Remember, we pronounce the W as a V. So when we come to Max Weber, he provides a bit of a middle ground in all this. For Marx, a person's class referred to their relationship to the means of production and their source of income. That's it. Weber takes a more general approach. He's not as specific. For Weber, he felt that class referred to what he called a person's market situation. So, your possession of goods, your opportunities for income, your level of education, your level of technical skill. And this is a much, much broader idea than that of Marx, a much more general concept of class, but at the same time, much more detailed because he includes much more in it. And Weber's ideas of stratification focus on more than a one-component theory, more than just class. This is called the Weberian theory of stratification. But don't get freaked out with this term. It just means that he looked at much more than the means of production and income. So Weber's theory of stratification includes different components. The first, like Marx said, is class. But he also included what he referred to as status groups. Now, status groups are those that differ based on the amount of prestige or social honor they have and lifestyle. And take note that these are actually non-economic qualities. The amount of prestige a person has is not necessarily dependent on their economic status. The amount of honor a person has isn't either. So someone may not make much money or possess a lot of things, but still have a high level of prestige and honor, such as a religious figure or somebody who volunteers a lot, or somebody who's known for some kind of good work that they've done. Now the text provides the example of celebrities. Celebrities are a status group that has much more prestige, sometimes much more social honor, and certainly they enjoy a very particular lifestyle. Lifestyle can refer to where somebody lives, what they drive, the kind of residence they live in, what they wear. Now the text specifically mentions Kim Kardashian because she is famous for being famous. She isn't famous because she's a writer or a lyricist or a singer or an artist. Her fame originated with the leak of a sexual encounter she had with a previous boyfriend, and then smart marketing took over and she capitalized on it. So the first component of Weber's theory of stratification is status groups, groups that differ based on the amount of prestige or social honor they have and lifestyle. Weber also speaks about what he calls parties, and by this he means organizations that try to impose their will on others. Organizations formed by people to achieve certain ends. And I think the first example you might think of is a political party. A political party is an organization that certainly tries to impose its will on others. Environmental parties, economic parties, educational parties, health parties, and of course I could go on and on. With Weber's definition of what a party is, a special interest group would certainly be an example. In the United States, the NRA is a well-known special interest group with a great deal of power, economically, politically, and socially, that very, very proactively does what it can to maintain its own interests and to impose its will on others. An environmental group might do the same. A religious group might do the same. So a party involves striving for a goal in a planned manner. These are associations of people that attempt to influence social action. They attempt to achieve specific and well understood goals in a planned and rational manner. So again, a political party, a special interest group, or a religious organization, or a trade union. So to bring this all together, Weber's theory of stratification is different from that of Marx because he looked at more than just economic status, and he viewed each of his components independently as their own separate group, but he also saw that they were highly influenced by each other. And I don't think that's hard to imagine or picture, that economic classes affect parties or organizations, that status groups affect parties, that parties affect economic classes in different ways, that status groups may influence membership in or participation in parties, and around we go. So Weber really recognized the intersection of all of these, that they affect each other, that they influence each other, and that in some ways they are dependent on each other. And this is why, according to Max Weber, when somebody moves up or down the ladder of social stratification, which is social mobility, their movement or lack of movement is affected and determined by these three factors: not just straightforward economics. So this is social mobility, moving up or down the stratification system. And at the center of any discussion of social mobility is pretty much my favorite thing to discuss with students, and it's basically what we have discussing, and that is, do we live in an equal, fair, just society? Do you personally think that everybody in society has the same opportunities, the same chances to be successful, equal chances at a good life? Now, this refers to something different than income distribution and how much of an income gap there is. When I ask you whether or not you think everybody has the same opportunities in life, this can refer to several issues. Do you believe that everybody has the same opportunity for education? Not just to have one, but the same quality of education, the same quality of school, the same quality of teachers, the same quality of resources like books and playground equipment and computers and the building itself. Do you think that everybody generally has the same opportunities regarding the number of years they spend in school? And education is just one factor. So we're not just describing inequality, we can describe it. This takes a bit different approach by looking at how much opportunity there is for social mobility. If this would mean opportunity to go up for those who work hard, put in the time and effort, who I think must possess a certain amount of natural ability, whether that's intellectual ability, physical ability, whatever it is. But this means there should also be movement down the scale for those who don't work hard, who simply do not put in the time and effort or are not willing to. In an open society, this is what would happen. In an open society, also referred to in the text as a fluid society, no matter what family you're born into, whether greatly advantaged or greatly disadvantaged, where you end up in life would be dependent on you. So in an open, fluid society, there is opportunity for mobility to move up or down the ladder of social stratification. Canada puts itself forward as an open society. So does the US, Great Britain, most industrialized countries do. But what if a country isn't open and fluid? What if a society is structured so that the family you're born into has a direct, lasting effect on where you end up as an adult? In a closed or rigid society, this is what happens. If you are born into a poor family or a disadvantaged family, you will remain in that social status and that economic status because that's what you were born into. It doesn't matter how much education you get because your position in society was determined at birth. So the amount of education you get is not going to affect your position. The classic example that comes to mind for most people in this regard is the caste system in India. India's caste system is among the world's oldest forms of surviving social stratification. And historically, it was used to divide Hindus into rigid groups in a hierarchy based on their work, their karma, and their dharma, which is the Hindi word for religion, but here it means duty. This system is generally accepted to be more than 3,000 years old. In India, for centuries, caste dictated almost every aspect of Hindu religious and social life, with each group occupying a specific place in this complex hierarchy. Rural communities were long arranged on the basis of castes, so that the upper and lower castes almost always actually lived in segregated colonies. The water wells were not shared. Brahmins would not accept food or drink from the, I hope I don't pronounce this right, from the Shudras, and one could only marry within your caste. So traditionally, the system bestowed many privileges on the upper castes, while sanctioning repression of the lower castes by privileged groups. This was often criticized for being unjust and regressive, but it remained virtually unchanged for centuries, trapping people in every way into fixed social orders from which it was impossible to escape. Historically speaking, societies the world over have been less open. meaning that historically, your position as an adult was likely to be much, much more influenced by the circumstances of your birth. Even if not absolutely determined, strongly, strongly influenced. There is another manner of stating this that sociologists often use, and this is ascriptive based on your ascribed characteristics, things that you generally cannot change. Your gender, your religion, your skin color, or your socioeconomic status at birth. You can't change those things. So if I said a society's system of stratification was ascription based, that would mean it is a society, a system, whereby where you end up is based on what you were born into. Now, if I said a society's system of stratification was achievement based, that would mean it's a system whereby where you end up is dependent on your own accomplishment, your own achievements, or your lack thereof. It's based on what you do or you don't do, on what you achieve yourself or do not achieve, because it's an open society. So everybody has the ability to achieve. Everybody has opportunity. So to keep these two concepts straight in your head, an achievement-based society means you have the opportunity to achieve something, to do something. An ascription-based society means you don't even have an opportunity to change your status. You're born into your status. Now, notice that I said that religion was a ascription characteristic, but I also have this here under achievement-based societies. And the reason I do is because it depends on the society in which you are. In some societies, it is simply not possible to change your religion or your beliefs. But in some societies, it is, which is why I have it under both. Now, this seems very straightforward, and it kind of is looking at these two kinds of societies in their purest forms. But the majority of the world is no longer like this. And I want to be very clear here. Even in open societies, when your status, the amount of social mobility that you do or do not have, is based on your own achievements or lack thereof, a system of stratification is not as clear cut. It's not accurate to state that everybody has the same number of opportunities or the same kinds of opportunities in an achievement-based society. The fact is that some families with economic advantage do what they can to ensure that this advantage is passed on to their children, and those kids pass it on to their children, and so on. And the textbook provides an absolute perfect example of this, with the pictures of Roy Thompson, who was Canada's wealthiest man in 1976, his son Ken, who was Canada's wealthiest man in 1996, and his son David, who was Canada's wealthiest man in 2016. This is inherited advantage, even though we're in an open, fluid society based on achievement. Donald Trump likes to say that he's a self-made man, but the fact is that his father provided him at least $1 million for his startup. In short, no countries except for perhaps Sweden and the Netherlands, which are two countries that enjoy much greater equality overall, are completely achievement-based. Yes, in Canada, people are spending more and more years in school overall, and that can affect their social mobility. But the fact is, the socioeconomic status of your family of origin has an extremely strong effect on the amount of education a person is likely to achieve. In other words, there continues to be a very strong link between level of educational achievement and family advantage or disadvantage. And I don't mean this sarcastically, I truly don't, but I'm always surprised by people who feel our education system levels the playing field of socioeconomic status and inequality. How can it, when some kids attend Montessori daycares with homemade lunches from scratch every day and educational field trips every week, and gymnastics and music and second or third language lessons, and some do not? When some students attend schools where every single teacher has attended graduate school, and they have a budget for their classroom yearly in the thousands of dollars, and some do not. when some students have to work year round, part-time, or part-time during the school year and full-time during the summer. And they take out loans that will take them over a decade to pay off, and some do not. When I talk about this in class, I always take a poll and ask students to raise their hand if they would like to be able to graduate without owing any money for student loans. Every hand goes up. Then I ask who would like to graduate owing $50,000 in student loans, and not one goes up. Because of course, everybody would prefer to be advantaged instead of disadvantaged. So even though Canadians as a whole and Americans spend more years in school on average than at any other point in history, which you would think would level out social stratification and inequality, the connection between your family background, specifically the socioeconomic status of your family of origin, and educational achievement still exists. The socioeconomic status of your family of origin is likely to strongly affect how much education you end up with. And those from a higher socioeconomic status are likely to earn more education.